And the point that I'm making is that in everybody's life, at some point, there's a plan B. God is talking to us every step of the way. God is trying to show you something every step of the way. When things seem to be going wrong, that's God's way of opening another door. I am convinced that God has been directing me every step of my life.
On the Word Network.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons. But I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's ministries. You'll never be the same.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
Today I want to talk about reconciliation. I've spoken in the past about reconciliation that Jesus preaches in the Sermon on the Mount. That if you're angry with a brother, you're on your way to pray, but if you're angry with a brother, stop and reconcile before you go to the altar in prayer. And today I want to give you a real life example from the Bible of two men who reconciled. It's the story of Abraham and his nephew Lot. In the 13th chapter of the book of Genesis, it tells us that Abraham and Lot, who've been together since they came into Israel, you may recall in that story, God tells them to come to a land flowing with milk and honey, but when they get to the land of Canaan, there's a drought. And so they go down to Egypt. In Egypt, they have all kind of events that happen to them. But Abraham actually leaves Egypt a much wealthier man than he came. And that's a whole nother set of stories. He and Pharaoh got it mixed up about Sarah being the wife of Abraham. Pharaoh thought Sarah was the sister to Abraham. And so he ended up paying a bride price to Abraham for his own wife. And Abraham doesn't tell him the truth that Sarah is really his wife because he's afraid he's going to get killed down there in Egypt. But as things work out, Abraham and Sarah and Lot leave Egypt. And when they leave Egypt, they have many more sheep than they had when they entered Egypt. Abraham has more silver and gold than when he entered Egypt because Pharaoh has paid him. And so now when they come out and they go back to the land of Canaan, we find that Abraham and Lot have a lot of sheep, and sheep would be the equivalent of money today. Yeah, what do you use sheep for? You could sell sheep to people who want to eat sheep. You know, when I was doing mission work in Ethiopia, I had dinner with a man who told me he bought a sheep every 2 weeks. And then for 2 weeks, he and his wife would eat every part of the sheep except the eyes. And so, sheep then and sheep now are a valuable commodity. And so in the case of Abraham, he and Lot have a lot of sheep. They're in the land of Canaan, but the shepherds who are working for Lot, the shepherds who are working for Abraham, they're at odds with each other. They're contentious. And what are they contentious over? They're contentious over whose sheep are whose. And frankly, for me, an untrained eye, when I look at a sheep, they all look the same. But in the case of Lot and Abraham, they are duking it out over the sheep. And so finally, Abraham, being the uncle, the elder uncle to Lot, he pulls him aside. He says, look, we're family. We're kinfolk. We shouldn't be fighting over sheep. And Abraham makes a suggestion. He says, Lot, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the east, I'll go to the west. You go to the north, I'll go to the south. Just pick wherever you want to go, and I will go in the opposite direction, but let us not fight over sheep. And so at that point, Lot looks around, and he decides, he says, I want to go over there. Well, guess where over there was? Sodom and Gomorrah. You think about the choices we make in life. He chooses Sodom and Gomorrah, where even then it was saying that, people were living really crazy kind of lives. And it's so crazy that in a short while, Abraham has to go rescue his nephew. But the story starts with nephew Lot going to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so as Lot heads out with his sheep and his shepherds to the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, God whispers in the ear of Abraham. And he says, Abraham, look to the north, look to the south, look to the east, look to the west. He said, as far as your eyes can see, I will give this land to you. Now, for you listening to me today, think about what I've just said. And I use this text very often in helping families to reconcile. And it's usually the people who come to me and need a reconciliation are families, brothers and sisters, parents and children. And I give them this example of Abraham and Lot. And I say, now, think about what has happened here. In an effort to reconcile real differences, one person, being Abraham, says to the other person, Lot, whatever you want, you can have. Just let's be friends. That's how the reconciliation started with Abraham and Lot. But then where it ends is God whispers into the ear of Abraham and says, essentially, I will give it all to you. I'm giving it all to you. You were big enough, you were magnanimous in being generous and gracious and good, but I am giving you more than what you've given up. And there's a lesson in this. I tell this to people all the time. I say, you really should strive for unity in your family. You really should strive for harmony. You really should strive for reconciliation. And sometimes people just don't want to reconcile. And when they don't want to reconcile, all they want is their way. And what Abraham does in this story is he says, have it your way, Lot. Hold the pickles and the lettuce. Special orders don't upset us. Have it your way. That's from Burger King. And Lot cheerfully goes off to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I tell you, in life, you have to know what's really important. I wrestled for a moment about whether or not I would share this little story with you, but I have a real life story about this kind of reconciliation. In my own family, I buried the last of my siblings a couple years ago. And before he died, I talked to him. I told him, Steve, I think I want to go on the Word Network, and I want to have a ministry on the Word Network. I think I'm ready. I think the Word Network is the right network for me, and I want to do this. But my brother had gotten angry with the owner of the Word Network. He did a radio show on the Word Network, and he got angry with the owner, and he parted company. And so when I told my brother, I want to be on the Word Network, guess what he told me? He said, Nick, if you go on the Word Network, I promise you I'll never talk to you again. And I'm saying to myself, man, isn't that? And I told him, I laughed. I said, Steve, don't you think that's a little extreme to tell me you're not going to speak to me ever again because I want to do a television broadcast preaching the good news of Jesus Christ? He said, I swear I'll never talk to you again. And so guess what I did? I thought about my own counseling. You know what I tell people all the time about Abraham and Lot. I didn't go on the Word Network right away. And like in 2020, my brother died. And after my brother died, and I gave him an acceptable funeral and paid for the funeral expense, guess what I did? I called the Word Network. And I'm on it right now. And I kind of chuckled about it because I said, well, I hope my brother's in heaven, and I hope he understands what I've done. I said, but in life, sometimes and I'm doing well. I haven't lost anything being on the Word Network. What is the point that I'm making? The point that I'm making, my friends, is sometimes you have to ask yourself what's really important in life. And for me, having a relationship with my brother was important. I used to talk to him 2 to 5 times a day on the telephone. And, I said I didn't want to lose that kind of relationship just because he was angry about something. And so I just leave you with this thought. 1, I thank you for watching the program today. 2, I want you to ask yourself, who do I need to reconcile with? 3, then I want you to ask yourself, how far am I willing to go to reconcile with somebody else? And the reason why I shared this little story from my personal life about my brother and, the going back and forth with him is that I want you to know I'm no better than you. In terms of my personal relationships, to be quite honest, sometimes I've had some people get very angry with me. And when people become angry with you, you have to ask yourself, what does it take to bring a relationship back together? And what you may find is often, just like Abraham in the Lot in Abraham's story, is that God has a blessing with your name written on it. God already knows what God wants you to do, what God wants you to receive. And God just wants you to figure out, how can you be gracious and kind, good? How can you be a good brother, a good sister, a good friend, a good son, a good daughter? And in the process of doing that, God will whisper to you, just like God whispered to Abraham, look to the north, look to the south, look to the east, look to the west. It all is for you. And the reason why it will all be for you is because you have tried to live out the promise of God in your earthly relationships with those people you do not get along with. And that's the word that I leave you with today. Never give up on the redemptive grace and mercy and the forgiveness that God has for each of us. Stick around, and in just a moment, I'm going to be talking with a friend of mine, Reverend David Nunn Telford. He's a young minister from Chicago, Illinois, and I want to get his perspective on Abraham and Lot. Meanwhile, why don't you open up your Bible and read Genesis chapter 13. And if you really want to put chapter 13 in perspective, start at verse chapter 1 and go to chapter 13, and it'll make more sense. God bless, God keep you. Stick around. and I'll be right back.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because of course you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this new platform will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world, and Lord knows we need it.
Thank you for staying with us. In this segment, we're talking about reconciliation and an example of reconciliation between Abraham and his nephew Lot. And most of the people I've ever met who need to reconcile are families. I don't know what your experience has been like, and partly because it's hard to reconcile or to have a need to reconcile unless you've already been close to somebody. But today I have with me Reverend David Nunn Telford from Chicago, Illinois. And matter of fact, he'll be preaching at my church tomorrow. I hope you'll check him out. And he's going to give a perspective on Abraham and Lot. But before we do that, I just want to publicly thank again some of the people who've been contributing to the program. Millicent Holly, Deborah McIntosh from Mobile, Alabama, who is a repeat contributor. Delgenia Barber, repeat contributor from Detroit, Michigan. Lorimer and Jackie Wyatt, repeat contributors from Southfield, Michigan. Charles Johnson and Brother Johnson, I still got to figure out where you're from. I think it's New York, but I counted to my head and not my heart. To Vernell Davenport from New York. Lois Perry, Delgenia Barber, multiple contributor every month. Dr. Adenika Nunu from Detroit. Joyce Thompson from Sacramento, California. Huel Perkins from Detroit in the high rent area. Joyce Penn, Detroit. And Josephine Austin from Detroit. And there are others. But I want to thank you. And the reason why I'm mentioning the contributors is a program like this can only survive with support, financial support. And I need you. If you've been looking at this program, a lot of people call in every week and they say, you know, I listen to your program, I watch your program, and that makes me feel very good to know that there are people all over the country looking at this program. But by the same token, I want you to think about, could I be a contributor? And we're not necessarily talking about a lot of money, you know, $10, $25 a week. But whatever you're able to contribute, I'd like you to think about doing it. And why? Because I think a ministry like this is very important. I've been thinking about, and I don't know if I ever just shared this with you, Reverend, but I've been considering doing a broadcast ministry like this since I was 25. The head of the Christian Communication Council in Detroit asked me to basically be a host on a program on our NBC network, WDIV, in Detroit, and then that expanded to the ABC network, then the CBS network. And from the very beginning, I said, boy, this is something I could do. But by the same token, you know, I was in the ministry, Then I got into politics, elected politics, in the city council in Detroit. And I just said, I just could never see a good time. And then finally, somewhat later in life, I decided to do this. And so I'm just so glad to do it. And I'm so glad you're here today. For any person who is able to make a contribution, I will send you this book. This is a book called The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, The Way Out. It's a book that I wrote of personal prayers and photographs. I'm a closet photographer. And I write a prayer almost every day. And if you'd like to receive my prayers, you can receive them for free on a blog that I write every day called Nicholas Hood III on WordPress. Just remember it, WordPress, and type my name in, and they will, show you all of the prayers that I write. But today we have Reverend David Nunn Telford. And Pastor Nunn Telford, you heard me talk a little bit about Abraham and Lot. What are your thoughts?
Well, Reverend Hood, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation to be back. So great to be with all of you as well. Abraham and Lot, that story, their interaction, their conflict and coming back together is really fascinating on a lot of different levels. Some folks may have seen me on some of the past episodes, so they know that I am always fascinated by the text and how the text comes together, who writes it, why, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's incredibly appropriate here, because when we think about the book of Genesis and that part of the Hebrew Bible, it's really written in the period of the monarchy. And the monarchy, as some people may know, was a period where Israel itself had split. There were two parts of the nation. It was the north and the south. So they themselves were in conflict with each other. And it's fascinating to me that in that moment where the nation itself is split and in conflict, they begin to have questions about their origins and where they come from. And they retell this family story about conflict and reconciliation as they themselves, the nation, is trying to figure things out. Now, the question might be, why do they tell this story, right? Why do they air this part of the family history, if you will? And I think part of it might be to normalize what you're naming, right? Which is that families have issues, right? All families have issues.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, all families have strife, and I think that sometimes it's important just to name that. People love to get the Christmas cards with everybody perfectly groomed, and everyone has the matching pajamas and all that kind of stuff. But every now and then, it's important to say out loud that families have issues, right? And it's important that as Israel's historians, if you will, come together to tell the story of how the nation came to be in the middle of conflict, where the north and the south are split, they tell this story. That's the first thing that kind of comes to mind when I think about how Abraham and Lot are going through this moment. The second thing that I think comes to mind for me is the fact that, as you said, Abraham tells Lot, choose where you want to go, right? And I loved how you kind of positioned it as, whatever you want, I just want to stay family. I just want us to keep our relationship. I think that another way of thinking about it is that Abraham trusts God enough that whatever might be going on between him and Lot, he's not going to keep Lot kind of like tethered and hooked on his hip. He's going to let Lot go off, whatever Lot may need to do, and trust God that in some way they're going to come back together. And I think that that's so important because as I pastored, as I had conversations with folks, and as I counseled, I think that it was really tough for some people to let some people go, even if it was for a season, trusting that they would come back or trusting that their relationship would change, right? We talked about the evolution of Esther a week ago. Relationships evolve, relationships change. There are peaks and valleys. And I think that the fact that Abraham is able to let Lot go, and it was unfortunate how they came back together, right? It was a moment of danger. But the fact that they were able to come back together, I think matters. And so Abraham's trust in that relationship, I think, really stands out to me.
It's interesting to me in the aftermath of the October 7th invasion of Israel, many of the people in the kibbutz, one of the kibbutzes that was attacked on October 7th, went to Sodom and Gomorrah. They went to Sodom, for security. Because, and a lot of people, you may not, those of you looking at this may not realize this, but present day Sodom and Gomorrah are actually in a very warm part of Israel. And that's where the Dead Sea is. And it's kind of bombed out. At least the part that I've been to, from, I guess, what we read about in the Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But you're right. This whole struggle for reconciliation is real. And I believe that there are people looking at this today who probably need to reconcile with somebody. And usually the people we need to reconcile with, as I tell my church, are the people who are closest to you. The people who weren't close to you to begin with, you don't have anything to reconcile with because you weren't conciliatory necessarily to begin with. But Reverend David Nunn Telford, thank you so much for being with me today. And I hope this is not the last time. I hope whenever you're in Detroit, you'll come back.
Absolutely.
And we'll try to make it possible to have you say a word on the Word Network.
Absolutely.
All right? Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. God bless, God keep you. And remember, I am praying for you. God bless. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you for watching today's program. We hope you've been blessed in a powerful way. Just knowing you took the time to watch today's broadcast is a great encouragement to Pastor Nick Hood. If this broadcast has been a blessing to you, we ask that you mail a tax-free donation to Nicholas Hood Ministries at 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
The point that I'm making is that in everybody's life, at some point, there's a plan B. God is talking to us every step of the way. God is trying to show you something every step of the way. When things seem to be going wrong, that's God's way of opening another door. I am convinced that God has been directing me every step of my life.
On the Word Network.